Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak today. I'd be happy to answer any of the questions. I think those were wonderful questions that were asked earlier, except for what it's like to be a minority woman. I know nothing about that. The others I'm happy to answer. Well, I'm going to start off by giving a background of my growing up and try to give you some ideas about, along the way, how I was influenced, and also just my views on minority education, which I think are not contradictory, but I do have a unique view, I think, or maybe not unique, but a different view than some, as far as what needs to be done. And some has to do with some of the questions that were asked here. And I think there's different ways to look at some of these issues. Well, I'm from a small town from New Mexico. As Tony said earlier, I'm half Spanish. My dad's family is Spanish from New Mexico. My mom's family is Mexican. So I know what he meant by that. And as many others, I always knew I was college bound. I came from a family where my dad, he went to college, and in that way it was rare. He had a much harder upbringing and I think went through a lot more trials than I ever had to. Coming from a very tiny village of 20 or 30 people and somehow finding his way into college. So I always knew that I was college bound. Even with my dad going on and he ended up being an elementary school principal, I was never given a real good idea of what you went to college for except to become a teacher. When he went to school, that's what you went to do. You went to become a teacher, and that was all he knew. That was all he could help with. And my mom, she graduated from high school, but that's where we came from, a family of well, he was a teacher. The rest had worked in schools of some sort, not really gone to college and such. But if you went to college, that's what you went to do. And going to school, I did very well. I finished at the top of my class, but I was still extremely poorly prepared for college. I went to New Mexico State University in Las Cruces on a scholarship and just about lost it right away. And that was one thing that I know people talked about earlier today. The level of education at this K through 12, especially when you get into small rural towns, it's terrible. You do not come out prepared for anything that has to do with the sciences or mathematics. And I was the best I had to offer at the time, and I had a hard time. And so when I went to college, I went as both a bio major / journalism major. I wanted to become a rock critic, and I still kind of do. But there were certain expectations as well that I was to continue in the sciences. However, I was afraid, and somebody had mentioned something about this earlier as well, of some of the courses in science, and I was afraid of the failure aspect of it. Especially when you come from a small town where nobody really got, I don't think anyone ever got a PhD, and you come from a huge family where you can count 50 cousins on either side, and most of them are just taking on the jobs of the town. There's nothing wrong with that, but very few leave off to college. You end up feeling a tremendous amount of pressure to do well at whatever you're going to do. And I found it very easy to do some of the more humanities things. I finished with actually an English minor, and I still love to write. But the sciences scared me quite a bit, and it took a lot of I guess just talking into, in a sense, that it was okay to do what I wanted to do, to try to pursue it. And even if I didn't end up at the top, that was okay as well. I was approached by a professor somewhere around my second year, Dr. Peter Hood. I was taking a biology course from, and he asked me about research, and that kind of sparked my interest, that maybe I could get an insight into what the science is really about at that point. And so I went ahead and started doing research with him in the field of avian systematics. And after a semester, I really started to enjoy the work. I liked the idea of doing science. I was having fun. I felt like I was getting to play, and just having a lot of fun with it. I was picked up by a program called the MARC program that I know they have at several universities, which is a Minority Access to Research Careers, I believe. And there was funding and opportunities to go to conferences and try to network with others that were in the same position as me. And that helped tremendously for me to decide to finally make my full major biology and switch into sciences. I started to get a little more confidence that I could actually do science. Before my senior year, the big step that actually propelled me into wanting to pursue a career in science definitely was I attended a RU program in scanning probe microscopy at Arizona State University. And Tony Garcia, he was one of the faculty involved in that. And I absolutely fell in love with biophysics. I had never really, at Mexico State, there just really wasn't much going on in the field of biophysics, and I didn't have a real insight to that. Well, I just absolutely fell in love with it and decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to move somehow into chemistry and try to find my way over to chemistry and biochemistry and biophysics. And the way it happened that next year, Arizona State was just happened to be starting a program which was a title, Biomolecular Optical Devices, neat little title, and it sold me right away. It was an interdisciplinary program to bring biologists and try to introduce chemistry and physics, a higher background to them, and do the opposite in engineers and try to integrate everything together. And that was started by Neil Woodbury, the chemistry department there. So he brought me in, and I just fell in love with the research. Him and my advisor that I ended up doing my work under, Dr. Robert Blankenship, were excellent mentors, as well as Dr. Hood Peter Hood at Mexico State. And one of the big things that all three of them kind of did for me, which is one of my big points here, is I never felt different. Growing up, I never did. Maybe I'm just cocky, but I never felt different. I never felt that there wasn't anything I couldn't do. And the best thing they ever did to me was they treated me just like they did all their other grad students. I was just there, I was supposed to do the work, and I went in, I enjoyed the work, loved doing it, and I went ahead and I think that did okay with that. So as I said, I've worked with Dr. Blankenship over the last few years. He's been a wonderful mentor and helped introduce me to where I'm on the move to right now, which is Los Alamos. Work with Andy Shreve and getting more into the heavier biophysical side and working on some artificial stuff. That's kind of my background, and there's some issues that I kind of brought up during that, but that I kind of wanted to touch on. And there's four big things that have been mentioned and great questions about them and great conversation already, and that I find extremely important. One is cultural pressures, and we'll talk about that. The second is assimilation. Third is alienation, and the fourth is outreach, which Elizabeth, with her final statement there we need outreach to people, and it's very important. Just getting back to cultural pressures, the one big thing and I don't know if this is a cultural thing, I can't say that it only happens to minorities, but I think one of the problems coming back is that when I look at the other people that I was doing my PhD with, most of them come from a background where their education was something that had already been achieved to a high level. They had parents and grandparents that had PhDs, or doctors, or medical doctors, or engineers, and things like that. So they could equate, and I'm not saying, like, once again that it is a cultural thing, but they seem to be able to equate a little more success with an education level. And even though it was extremely important to my family to pursue education to as high a level as possible, there was always this underlying thing that success does in a sense equal money. They figure, well, if you're going to go to school for all this time, you better come out making some money. I mean, that's at least what they would expect, right? So when you go and you talk to your grandma who's 80 years old and 4 feet tall and try to tell her what you're doing, and she has a third grade education, and she says, well, are they paying you well for this? I said, Grandma, I'm still a student. And it's kind of hard for them to understand that. So, and that's something, like I said, I don't know if it's culture, I'm sure other cultures go through it too, but I think it's a very widespread and very popular type thing that happens in minority cultures. Because they want the best for their kids, and the biggest thing for them is that they want them to get out of the situation that they were in. And the way to get out is with money, not by necessarily taking out loans and this and that to pursue higher education. And so that kind of needs to be changed, that whole way that it's perceived in the community needs to be changed. And then I have in here, quote unquote, becoming a real doctor. That's always a fun one. It's not a real doctor. And one thing that's also with that was yeah, exactly. The ability of, as I said, a lot of the other grad students that I work with, they don't really have to worry about money. I don't come from a poor family, but I sure don't come from a rich family. And trying to get through a graduate education on what they pay you as a stipend to support yourself is not that easy sometimes. And so that's something that I think it leads back to this money thing. It's hard to talk a student that he's getting pressured from home or she's getting pressured from home about maybe needing to become a little more independent a little sooner and quicker than some of these others, or some other students. And another big part of that is, yeah, there is no one to relate to. You don't have an uncle or an aunt that has a degree in this and that you can say, you can look to as an example. And that's something that I'm finding myself now with my goddaughter who's getting ready to go to college, trying to be that example to her. That it's okay and that it's something that we would like the family would love to see and be proud of to pursue education as high as possible. As far as the assimilation, the academic culture, I think it will only bend so much as, and I don't necessarily even see this as being the problem per se. When you go to a conference, say, where they speak a foreign language, everything's done in English. We're still asking people to bend to our culture, and that's always going to be the way that things are. And I think that to ask to bend, they're trying, and that's why a lot of people are here, is we're trying to find ways to accommodate. But more than that, I think it's motivation is necessary. We need to try to find ways to motivate these students into wanting to pursue higher education. Not necessarily trying to meet them, because that's, in a sense, a little condescending as well. We need to try to work on something to where we can understand each other, I guess, a little bit better, and help them to understand what's trying to be achieved. And that kind of leads to that next point, which is alienation. As I said, I didn't know I was different, and I still don't. I was never recruited as a minority or Hispanic. I was recruited because of my grades and because I did well in school. Mentors do need to understand that's extremely important, and they do need to try to understand that there are cultural differences, and they do need to try to accept that there are. And there's going to be some that are going to be extremely hard, like was brought up in case in point, where it's hard when you have a family, and this is a huge cultural problem where I'm surprised my family isn't here right now with me, you know. But that's, and those are things that I don't think there is an easy answer to. But there are these differences that need to be understood by mentors, but not necessarily by treating them different. Because the minute you start treating somebody different, they're going to feel different, and they're going to start thinking they're different. And like I said, probably the biggest thing that ever happened to me is I was never treated different. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not. And you know, I think that. But looking back at it, there's a problem with the lack of role models, and this is a problem we need to solve, and it's really for the next generation. And as I said, the first step is graduate student representation. There's just not a lot right now. I know that. Me and Elizabeth, we can walk around the halls. We're lucky in our department. There seems to be quite a bit of minorities, but I think that's rare, and I think it's very rare. And we really need to, as was brought up with some of the graphs here, we are still very underrepresented, and we need to increase that type of representation. And that's really the first step that needs to be done, because the only way you're going to get professors and mentors that are minorities is to get them as graduate students first. So we can't solve the bigger problem without solving the smaller problem, and that's really where we need to work. And the outcome is really down the road. It's going to be a long process that needs to take place. And finally, the outreach. The mentors and graduate students, they need a better communication with groups, and not just minority as well. One thing that I always try to say, it's not just a minority problem. It's a poor white kid's going to have as many problems as a poor Hispanic kid, as a poor black kid. And when you look at some of the things that were shown, say in Milwaukee and such, you're looking at socioeconomic problems. And these kids coming from it just happens that they're predominantly minority. But this problem really has to deal with a lot of financial issues and trying to get education evened out throughout all of these. And my big thing that somebody was I think asked for a bold statement. I actually have it here in bold because it's the biggest thing that I think that is needed, is that once you succeed and you get a PhD, then keep them and give back. You need to teach these students to cherish what they've done and to give back to their community. And that's one of my big goals coming out, and I think that needs to be the big goal of all these minorities. So.